I wanted to start our first virtual class back together here, talking briefly about the critical intervention final photographic project. It is still on the syllabus. It is still worth 30% of your grade, and I wanted to get you back to thinking about this project. It's still worth 30% of your grade, and it's still due on May 7th. So I'm going to show some photographs that respond to previous photographs, and we're going to think about the ways in which they intervene in those original works. I'm also going to read this from the syllabus right now, briefly about the critical intervention project, which we'll talk more about. It asks you to make or take a photograph as a critical intervention that responds to and alters a pre-existing photograph that we've discussed in class or that you've encountered in the readings. And here I'm going to be really pretty open to ideas that you have in terms of images. It doesn't have to be something that we've seen together as long as it works with the assignment. But I think we have seen a lot of photographs in this class that you could intervene upon. You will write a 6-page paper that will explain why you have made this critical intervention. And you may use any technique really, from paper collage to digital scan to wet lab photography to cell phone photographs in order to produce this piece of photo-based criticism. Okay, so let's look at some photographs. So here's the first example that we'll look at. This is a series by Carrie Mae Weems based on the Zealy daguerreotypes of slaves that we saw on the first day of class this semester. As you can see, Weems overlaid enlarged copies of the photographs of the daguerreotypes with inscriptions, such as you became a scientific profile and a Negroid type. These images of Renty and Jack and others are supplemented with these gallery quality frames. The series begins with a profile view of this dignified African American woman that you see on the left. And she looks to the right as if toward the future. And the series ends with the same image printed in reverse so that she appears to look back over the gathered pictures, hence the title of the series that sort of is from her point of view. From here, I saw what happened here and I cried. And the bits of text read sort of like these bits of a very bitter poem. So this is a great example of a critical intervention, a critical photographic intervention. She takes this original daguerreotype, these original daguerreotypes, and she reframes them, literally gives them a new frame and a new context. Here, meaning very clearly to return humanity and consciousness to the photographic subject. We noted that it began with the woman, who therefore becomes sort of the author of this series. You also learned that Harvard almost sued her for doing this, but then her works, once they became acclaimed, they sort of backed off and actually purchased some of her works for their own collection. There's still, these daguerreotypes, I will note, are still housed in a Harvard archive, and there is currently an active lawsuit against Harvard by a family member of one of the slaves who claims to be a direct descendant of some of the subjects in the Zealy daguerreotypes. Okay. These photographs are from a series by a contemporary photographer by the name of Debbie Grossman. Debbie Grossman reimagines a body of work by a Farm Security Administration photographer by the name of Russell Lee. I'll read this quote on the top right here. This is Grossman talking about her series. It, quote, reworks and reimagines a body of images originally photographed by Russell Lee for the United States Farm Security Administration in 1940. Using Photoshop to modify Lee's pictures, I've created an imaginary parallel world, a pie town populated exclusively by women, end quote. The Farm Security Administration was the organization of which Walker Evans and Dorothea Lange, who produced Migrant Mother. They also came from the Farm Security Administration. And Lee took this very thorough series of photographs of people in this town. And Grossman, now working in the 2000s, has reimagined them and turns all of the protagonists, all of the subjects in the photographs into women. And I'll show some more slides. Okay, so in this photographic intervention, we see that Grossman has removed the figure of the male body from Lee's original photograph, and then with some maneuvering has recreated the fence and the background that he stood in. This is one of my favorite ones. Grossman has removed the figure tying a ribbon on the calf's tail in Lee's photograph altogether. And Grossman has also worked with Photoshop to change the facial structure of the male figure to appear more feminine. And it's quite striking, I think. And we see now this in Grossman's photograph, this strong, competent, capable woman who was given the name of Ruth Leonard, securing a calf in her pasture. It becomes a different subject. It's no longer about tying a ribbon on a calf's tail, and we see this very self-sufficient, powerful woman. So here's another great example. In this one, no figures have been removed, but this male figure has been turned into a female figure by changing the body type. And in examples such as this, and in the collection as a whole, we get the sense that Grossman certainly wanted to make the point that women can be self-sufficient and strong and capable and without male help to exist in the world. And certainly I think she makes that point very convincingly with this series. And here we have a photograph from a different kind of series that also is an example of a photographic intervention. Gonzales Day took photographs of lynched victims, lynching photographs, and removed the body of the lynched victim to highlight the white crowds left in these spaces, in these photographs. This very much takes the same kind of approach that Sean Michelle Smith took in her essay, Spectacles of Whiteness, The Photography of Lynching, that we read back in February in this class. She decided to not look at the bodies of the victims, but instead to interrogate the bodies of the white people in the photographs, these white supremacist mobs. And I think in the same kind of vein, Gonzales Day is saying, let's now interrogate you. Let us look closely at you, this group of white people that have really not been analyzed before. So Sean Michelle Smith changed the original lynching photographs by refusing to make visible the original subject of those photographs, by cropping them out. She made it impossible to see the bodies of the victims, and the only thing that we can see in her cropped photographs are these white faces. Gonzales Day, as an artist, not a scholar, but an artist, is doing something different but very similar. He created a series, this one based on a postcard, where he removed only the body of the victim in this particular example and in the rest of the examples in his series, so that we're left with this sort of absurd collection of white people pointing guns at a tree. It makes it a little bit ridiculous. It makes it nonsensical. And in this case, there was originally a victim hanging from a tree, if that's not clear. And I think they're both doing something very similar, right? They're trying to find a way to incorporate into the history of photography, into our awareness, some of the most horrific images to come out of the entire history of photography, right? How do we not ignore those images? And yet, how do we not further perpetuate looking at bodies of victims and further dehumanizing these victims? They've both created ways of changing the subject matter entirely, right?